Two scary true stories that will keep you up at night. Story 1. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was a cold autumn night in 1983 when Daniel, a 32-year-old salesman, was driving home after a long business trip. The highway was empty, stretching for miles with nothing but the glow of his headlights piercing through the darkness. The hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of streetlights were the only company he had. The night felt eerily still, almost unnatural. As he rounded a bend near a wooded area, his headlights caught a figure standing by the roadside. A young woman, no older than her early 20s, was standing motionless in the dim light. She wore a long, vintage-style dress, the kind that looked decades out of place. Her hair was neatly pinned up, and her pale face looked lost and distressed. Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. He wasn't the type to pick up strangers, especially this late at night, but something about her seemed different, vulnerable. Against his better judgment, he pulled over and rolled down the window. "Are you all right? Do you need a ride somewhere?" he asked hesitantly. The woman slowly turned her head toward him. Her expression was blank, almost hollow, yet her deep-set eyes seemed to hold an overwhelming sadness. Without a word, she nodded and gracefully slipped into the back seat. The car filled with an unusual coolness, but Daniel brushed it off, chalking it up to nerves. As he pulled back onto the road, he glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. She sat perfectly still, hands resting in her lap, staring straight ahead. Trying to ease the silence, he spoke. "You out here all alone? It's pretty dangerous, especially this late." No response. "Where are you headed?" he tried again, forcing a chuckle to mask his unease. Slowly, she lifted a delicate hand and pointed down the road. Daniel followed the direction and noticed a small, dimly lit neighborhood sign up ahead. He nodded and continued driving. Minutes passed, but the silence felt heavier with each second. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air inside the car was unnaturally cold, despite the heater being on. His gut told him to ask more, to push for a reaction, but something deeper inside told him he didn't want to hear whatever answers she might give. Finally, they reached the house. A modest, old-fashioned home with a single porch light glowing faintly in the darkness. Daniel pulled into the driveway, took a deep breath, and turned around to let her know they had arrived. But the back seat was empty. His breath hitched. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as his heart pounded against his ribs. He hadn't heard the door open. He hadn't seen her move. She was just gone. A deep unease settled over him as he stepped out of the car, his legs unsteady beneath him. He approached the house hesitantly, his pulse drumming in his ears. Knocking lightly, he waited. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman with tired, knowing eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice weary. Daniel swallowed hard. I just gave a young woman a ride here. She was wearing a long dress, kind of old-fashioned. She didn't say much, just pointed to this house. But when I turned around, she was gone." The woman's face paled. Her wrinkled hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the door. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a hushed voice, she whispered, "That was my daughter. She died in a car accident on that road 20 years ago." Daniel's blood ran cold. A gust of wind swept through the night, sending a shiver through him. He didn't know what to say. What could he say? His mind raced, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The woman sighed deeply, a sorrowful expression settling on her face. "You're not the first to bring her home." Daniel stumbled back toward his car, his breath coming in short gasps. He didn't ask any more questions. He didn't want to know the answers. As he drove away, the porch light flickered, casting long shadows across the empty road behind him. And in his rearview mirror, just for a second, he swore he saw her sitting there again, watching. The Whispering Closet. When Sarah first moved into her new Chicago apartment, she thought she had found the perfect place. It was old but charming, with tall windows, vintage wooden floors, and a cozy atmosphere. The rent was surprisingly affordable, and the landlord seemed almost too eager to have her sign the lease. But at the time, she didn't question it. For the first few nights, everything seemed normal. She spent her evenings unpacking, decorating, and settling into her new life. But then, the whispers started. At first, she wasn't even sure she had heard them. It was faint, like a breeze slipping through the cracks of an old house. A soft, distant murmur that could have easily been her neighbors talking through the walls. But each night, the whispers became more distinct, more insistent. They always came from the same place, her bedroom closet. At first, Sarah tried to ignore it. She convinced herself it was just the old building settling, or maybe her overactive imagination. But the more she listened, the harder it became to rationalize. The voices weren't muffled like distant conversations. They were right there, just beyond the wooden door. Sometimes it sounded like a single voice, whispering in hurried, frantic tones. Other times, it seemed like multiple voices murmuring at once, overlapping and unintelligible. She could never quite make out the words, but the tones sent shivers down her spine. One night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she heard something different. A faint scratching noise. It came in short bursts, as if someone or something was gently clawing at the inside of the closet door. Sarah sat up. Heart pounding, she turned on her bedside lamp and stared at the closet, frozen with fear. Was it a rat? A loose hanger shifting? She tried to convince herself of anything normal, but deep down she knew something was wrong. The scratching stopped, replaced once again by the whispers. Come closer. The words were barely audible, but clear enough to make her blood run cold. She didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, Sarah avoided the closet as much as possible. She only opened it during the day, quickly grabbing her clothes before slamming it shut again. But she could feel it. Something was watching her, waiting. Then came the night she could no longer ignore it. The whispers had been unusually loud that evening, rising and falling like a desperate conversation. But when she turned out the lights and climbed into bed, they stopped. A heavy silence filled the room. Then, without warning, the closet door creaked. It didn't open all the way, just an inch or two. Just enough for a sliver of darkness to peek through. Sarah shot up in bed, her breath caught in her throat. The air in the room had shifted. It was colder, wrong. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes your skin crawl. Something was in there. She knew she should leave, run, do anything but sit there staring at the open crack in the door. But something inside her, morbid curiosity, or perhaps sheer terror, forced her to move closer. Slowly, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, her bare feet touching the freezing wooden floor. With shaky steps, she approached the closet, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. She reached out. She hesitated. Then again, with a deep breath, she yanked the door open. Nothing. The closet was completely empty. No hidden doors. No old coats shifting in the night. No sign of any intruder. Just an empty space. And a suffocating silence. Sarah let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding through her. I've been scaring myself for nothing. But just as she turned to step away, a cold gust of air rushed past her, chilling her to the core. And right next to her ear, a voice whispered, "Get out." Sarah didn't stop to think. She bolted from the bedroom, grabbing her phone and keys as she ran out of the apartment and into the hallway. She didn't look back. She never slept there again. The next day, she returned with a friend to gather her belongings, refusing to go alone. The closet door was open when they arrived, despite her knowing she had left it shut. But the room was silent. When she told the landlord she was breaking her lease, he didn't argue. He only nodded, his face grim, and muttered, "You lasted longer than the last tenant.